Πάνω στο τραπέζι για μένα.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Before leaving home tonight, my father, Kyrenia, suggested that tonight's event should have taken place in the square of Kyrenia's castle, where on a summer night one can feel the refreshing sea breeze and hear from down below the soft rhythmic sound of the waves breaking upon the Fylaktou breakwater. In the distance from the top of the mountain, the imposing figure of St. Hilarion Castle would be watching silently upon our congregation. For the time being, my father's suggestion cannot be realized. Let us therefore hope that the day will come soon when this will become a reality. My name is Christina Shamounkis, and I shall be your presenter tonight. I would like to kindly ask you to switch your mobile phones to silent mode. Thank you very much. I wish to call our mayor, Mr. Cariolou, for his welcoming address.
Your Eminence, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of all the Kyrenians, I would like to welcome you and thank you immensely for being with us tonight. Our heritage and the spirit of our people, it's our sole and only power, and probably one of the very few vehicles able to take us back home. The three municipalities of our district, Kyrenia, Labithos, and Karavas, and the 36 village communities that we have in the district of Kyrenia, we were approximately 33,000 people in 1974. As you probably know, apart from our own government, three major guarantor countries guaranteed and promised to safeguard our constitutional rights in 1960, and we do demand that they keep to their constitutional promise. In addition to that, today we cover a period of 10 years of being citizens of the European Union. Or you may say, we belong to the United States of Europe. And it is our right to ask for our human rights to be re-established after 40 years of deprivation. I take this opportunity to thank His Excellency the Ambassador of Greece for his valuable assistance, His Excellency the Minister of Education, Dr. Kostas Kavis, Dr. Andreas Fylaktou, who is always very hospitable, and to have us in this building. Reverend Savvas Hadjiionas, Mrs. Lina Sweeney, I hope a new Kyrenian, which is older than I am, as regards the contribution to my town. Mr. Manolis Psaros and Mrs. Sakian for their present, Mrs. Laia Karpasidou and the children from the Young String Soloists, Dr. Yannis Iliadis for his invaluable guided tour later on, Mr. Andreas Psaras of Makarios Winery, Mr. Jonathan Blair, Ms. Christina Shamounkis, our presenter, and last but not least, all of you distinguished guests that you came on a difficult time, perhaps, to see and to listen to what we have to pass to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, I wish to call His Eminence, Archbishop of the District of Kyrenia, for his address.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, Christos Anesti. I would like to thank the organizing committee for providing us the opportunity to address our greetings tonight at this cultural event. Thank you. Our presence underlines the paramount importance that we attach to the preservation and respect to our cultural and environmental heritage. It is worth mentioning that all those monuments, which are spread all over the island, represent our cultural fingerprints and constitute a continuous source of cultivating and establishing never-ending memories of our long-standing presence and history in Cyprus. Our intention is to contribute constructively to any measures and initiatives which are targeted to reveal our history, traditions, customs, legends and myths, and religious roots through the reconstruction, renovation, and maintenance projects. Concerning the various monuments, and more specifically, those in the Kyrenian district. Obviously, any such effort or initiatives should be undertaken under the coordination of the relevant departmental authorities of the government. It should be noted, however, that the Holy Metropolis of Kyrenia is entirely under Turkish occupation, has no steady income source, and this leads to worsening financial position, which limits these initiatives even more. Additionally, we would like to stress out the vital role and recognition that we pay to the respect of the physical environment, since nature and all the physical beauty with which the world is decorated, and in particular our island, represents a precious gift of God that needs to be preserved by us as human beings and passed on to the next generations. Therefore, we welcome any initiatives and efforts that are directed to the solution of the complex issues and problems that the environment is facing. After the tragedy of 1974, our children have lost the opportunity to enjoy the benefits that the beauty of nature and God have endowed the picturesque district of Kyrenia with. They cannot feel anymore the sensation of flowers, trees, forests, the beautiful sea of the unique Kyrenia Sea, the roaring of the waves, the majesty of nature. The only available source to the people nowadays is the use of their imagination to get an indication or a small glimpse of these feelings, in conjunction with the oral tradition and legend that pass on from one generation to the next. Finally, we wish to all of you a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Eminence. I should mention that we are all praying that on the 8th of September of 2014, we'll be able to exercise our religious duties at the Church of Our Holy Mary Nicosia opposite the Snake Island in Kyrenia. And now I call His Excellency the Ambassador of Greece, Mr. Vasilis Papaioannou, for his address.
Your Eminence, Mr. Minister of Education, dear colleagues, Mr. Mayor of Kyrenia, let me add my own welcome to this event tonight, dedicated to the protection and the preservation of the cultural heritage and the natural environment of Cyprus. It goes without saying that our embassy endorses projects focused on the value of our civilization, focused on our cultural heritage, which mark the treasure of every people and are closely connected to its identity. From the point of view strictly, if you want, of international law, according to the Hague Treaty of 1954, the cultural heritage has to remain intact by the passing of time and be preserved beyond any national or religious discriminations so that it can be passed on to the next generations. This is exactly the spirit of our approach. Bearing this in mind, I would like to seize this opportunity to remind you that only very recently, the Greek presidency of the European Union has achieved within the European Parliament the approval of the directive for the return of cultural property illegally removed from a country. Certainly, this does not solve the problem, but the purpose of this EU directive is to enhance the effectiveness of the procedures which secure the return of the cultural treasures back to their homeland. This resolution is of particular importance, of course, for a country when deprived from its cultural treasures and trademarks. And of course, this is very important for countries like Greece and Cyprus. In this connection, let me remind you our own experience in Greece. Since 1999, the Greek Parliament has endorsed a statement concerning, in particular, the return of the well-known problem of the marbles of Parthenon to Greece. Such a development will mark a substantive promotion of the common European cultural heritage. We are supporting the international cooperation on this issue. We are supporting the regional cooperation on this issue. Of course, the Parthenon is an ancient monument of worldwide importance. Yet, though there is now a new museum of Acropolis that holds the third place among the 50 best museums of the world, the pieces of the Parthenon are still dispersed, awaiting their return to the homeland. I seize this opportunity also to thank the House of Representatives of Cyprus, which has consistently underlined through adopted resolutions the need of the return of the marbles to Greece. Tonight, we focus on the continuous destruction of the cultural heritage in the occupied territories of Cyprus. Everybody knows that the tragic events of 1974 destructed violently important archaeological treasures and religious monuments of the island that had survived through centuries, thus causing unimaginable damage to the cultural heritage of the Republic of Cyprus. Yet, every country has the obligation to respect the identity and the cultural heritage of any other country in conformity with the provisions of the aforesaid treaty, which protects the national identity of the signatory countries. This is my message of this evening, and I would like to congratulate once more the organizers of this event, and thank you certainly all for your presence here tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We wish Greece a very successful and effective remaining presidency term. Now, I wish to call Dr. Andreas Fylaktou, the director of the Archbishop Makarios Foundation, Kyrenian in heart, for his own address.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I have great pleasure in joining you here tonight to mark the works of Kyrenian heritage revisited, gladly collaborating in the organization of the protection and preservation of cultural heritage and the natural environment of Cyprus. The Makarios III Foundation would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. For 40 consecutive years now, the sacred remains of the historic art of the people of Cyprus, reflecting and witnessing 8 millennia of uninterrupted culture, have been either desecrated, secretly taken abroad and sold, or ruined by the Turkish troops. These sacred remains include unique prehistoric sites with monuments of private dwellings and public buildings, Byzantine churches, monasteries, archaeological museums, art galleries, libraries, popular art museums, medieval buildings, fortifications, rich private collection of archaeological objects, innumerable ceramics, works of sculpture, and minor objects. Meanwhile, the natural environment of the occupied area, Pentadactylos, Kyrenia, and Karpas Peninsula, is severely affected by the troops. The salvation and protection of the cultural heritage and the natural environment of Cyprus is not a matter for the people of Cyprus alone. It is also a matter affecting the entire international community, which have been voicing and expressed its growing concern and has laid down in explicit and binding convention and recommendations the rules for the safeguarding of creation of human ingenuity, which mark not only the history of every country, but also of mankind in general. I would also remind the preamble of 1954 Hague Convention, which by its very nature should serve as guide for the interpretation of the various stipulations specified therein, accurately declares that, quote, damage to cultural property belonging to any people whatsoever means damage of the cultural heritage of mankind. Recently, the Byzantine Museum of the Makarios III Foundation has had the great pleasure in welcoming back to Cyprus treasures of its cultural heritage. In 2012, we welcomed the wall paintings of Agios Themonianos of Lysi, and we provided as close an authentic setting as possible for the wall paintings. Once again, I would like to thank the Demenil Foundation of Houston, Texas, very much for their valuable help, and all those who gave a helping hand for their repatriation. More recently, at the end of last year, 2013, a ceremony in our Byzantine Museum marked the repatriation of 173 ecclesiastical cultural treasures which were stolen from the occupied areas of the Republic of Cyprus. It constitutes the largest number of cultural objects ever repatriated in Cyprus, and the repatriation was achieved after a long legal battle in the regional court of Munich. The 173 Byzantine and post-Byzantine antiquities that still bear the signs of irreversible damage caused during the process of their detachment from the churches come from Greek Cypriot churches and churches of the Maronite community. They are unique examples of ecclesiastical art of Cyprus and will be temporarily exhibited in our Byzantine Museum until the day of their return to their places where they belong. After the speeches, you will have the opportunity to visit the various exhibits. Allow me now, concluding my address, to thank our distinguished speakers, Reverend Savvas Hadjiionas, His Excellency Kostas Kadis, and Honorable Glafkos Cariolou. Congratulations also to Mr. Susan Katsev, Mr. Laina Suini, and Mr. Haris Zalas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fylaktou. Professor Matthew Cariolou, a Kyrenian himself, is the father of the Cyprus Youth Strings Workshop, established in October 2006 by the Ministry of Education and Culture of Cyprus under the late Minister Papaioannou. The violin workshop is the first part of a laborious ongoing project. Over 30 talented children aged between 4 and 14 years participate in an aim to create the small children's string orchestra, which is expected to develop fully within the next 7 to 10 years. The performances of the violin workshop were greeted with enthusiasm by the audience. In June 2010, they performed in the honor of His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI on the occasion of his apostolic journey to Cyprus. The young performers received a prolonged and enthusiastic standing ovation from demanding audiences in Vienna, Moscow, the Vatican, and other prominent music destinations. Tonight, 4 of the children are with us. Enjoy them. Excellencies, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your warm applause. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to thank Glafkos, Anna Economou, Anisia Iakotou, Phylaktou, and Yana Trova on the piano. government, the Church, and the Cypriot patriots abroad to trace, monitor, rescue, and repatriate thousands of stolen icons and other treasures from over 550 Christian churches since 1974. Father Hadjiionas, please.
Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My approach to the issue of protecting the religious heritage of Cyprus in the context of this brief presentation will be first to give a very short history of the island with reference to the tragic events of the Turkish invasion of July 1974 and the cultural destruction that it caused, and then to look at the steps being taken by the Church of Cyprus to recover ecclesiastical and liturgical artifacts that have been stolen and sold abroad. Finally, I shall propose specific actions that can be taken in order to deal effectively with the illegal trafficking of cultural goods. Cyprus' extremely rich cultural and religious heritage, which has a recorded history of more than 10,000 years, may be understood more fully if we bear in mind the many influences that the country has absorbed over the centuries from various neighboring peoples and conquerors. The island's strategic location in the Eastern Mediterranean at the crossroads of Europe, Africa, and Asia, and their people and civilizations, is the main reason why it was taken over by various empires such as the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Persians, and the Romans. When in 395 AD the Roman Empire was split into its eastern and western parts, Cyprus came under the Eastern or Byzantine Empire and remained a part of it until the time of the Crusades, some 800 years later. Under Byzantine rule, the island's Greek orientation, which had been evident from antiquity, the first Greek wave of emigrants arrived in 1400 BC. It developed into the strong Greek Christian element which continues to characterize the Greek Cypriot community. Over the following centuries, Cyprus found itself under the rule of the Eleusinians, the Venetians, and the Ottomans. In 1878, it came under British rule and remained so until gaining independence in 1960. In July 1974, Turkey carried out a military invasion of Cyprus. As a result of the Turkish invasion, 37% of the island's territory was seized, and 180,000 Greek Cypriots were expelled from their homes in the north. At the same time, around 50,000 Turkish Cypriots were transferred by their political leadership to the occupied areas, where they settled in Greek Cypriots' houses and properties. Apart from the brutal invasion and all its tragic consequences, the continuing occupation and the violation of human rights, the international community has witnessed for more than 39 years the systematic destruction of the cultural heritage of Cyprus, as well as the desecration and looting of our religious monuments and churches, cemeteries, holy monasteries, chapels, and other sacred places of worship of the Orthodox Church in the occupied areas of the Republic of Cyprus. It is worth noting that some of these monuments belong to the religious groups in Cyprus: Maronites, Armenians, Latins, Protestants, and Jews. Turkey, in an obvious attempt to convert the occupied part of Cyprus into a Turkish Islamic province, applied a widespread colonization of around 300,000 illegal settlers, brought 400 imams from Turkey, established a number of schools of Islamic studies, built dozens of new mosques, and altered all the geographical names and toponyms. The uses to which these monuments are being put today are indicative of the systematic and premeditated policy of the Turkish occupation regime. All the cemeteries have been destroyed and devastated. Churches have been converted into mosques or turned into museums, cultural centers, granaries, stables and barns, theaters, offices, artists' workshops, exhibition spaces, and military installations. One church is even used as a mortuary. Some monuments have already collapsed, while others have been demolished by the Turkish invasion forces. From the majority of these monuments, all the movable and immovable items that could be sold or provide some kind of gain or benefit to the sacrilegious looters have been stolen, destroyed, or illegally exported and sold abroad. These include more than 20,000 icons, murals, mosaics, Bibles, gold and silver vessels, chandeliers, iconostases, vigil lamps, vestments, prayer books, and other liturgical artifacts such as chalices, censers, and crosses. In many instances, this illegal commerce has been carried out through auction houses. Thousands of these objects are now in the possession of private collectors and art galleries in Europe and the United States of America. Only a very small number have been identified and repatriated by the Church of Cyprus, in many cases following time-consuming and costly legal action. Indicatively and in brief, let us refer to the following cases. In 1983, two mosaic panels of the 6th century from the Church of the Holy Mother of God, Panagia Kana Karia Archithrandomi. 1991, 4 mosaic panels from the same church from Indianapolis, USA. In 1997, German police discovered in apartments maintained in Munich by the Turkish antiquities trafficker Identic Men hundreds of icons, sections of wall paintings, mosaics, and old manuscripts from some 50 looted churches in Turkish-occupied Cyprus. In September 2010, following a 7-year legal case, the court in Munich delivered its verdict in favor of Cyprus. On the 12th of November 2013, 173 artifacts of this case were officially received from Germany. We are now waiting for a decision by the Court of Appeal that will hopefully mean the return of the remaining 60 objects to Cyprus. In 2007, 6 Byzantine Cypriot icons from the Holy Bishopric of Morphu were repatriated from California, USA, following negotiations with the Charles Pankow Foundation. In 2010, 6 Byzantine Cypriot icons were handed back to the Church of Cyprus by a respected family in Munich. In 2011, in January, a post-Byzantine icon of the 18th century of Christ, which had been stolen from the Church of St. Haralambos at Neo Korioki, was returned by the well-known musician Boy George in London. In 2012, in March, the Menil Foundation in Houston, in Texas, returned the murals from the dome and the apse of the chapel of St. Ephemianos in occupied Lyci. The foundation had purchased and restored the murals following an agreement with the government of Cyprus and the Church of Cyprus. In September 2013, an icon of the representation of Christ was identified by the representation of the Church of Cyprus in Brussels to be auctioned in Salzburg, Germany. The icon was stolen after the Turkish invasion from the occupied monastery of St. Panteleimon in Myrtou. In September, it will be repatriated and will be delivered to Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Kyrenia, in whose jurisdiction the monastery of St. Panteleimon belongs. In 2013, on the 24th of September, 38 years after the theft from the monastery of Christ the Antiphonites in occupied Kalogrea of the Holy Bishopric of Kyrenia, 4 icons of the apostles, Peter, Paul, John, and Marcus of the 16th century returned to their homeland from Hague, the Netherlands. The Church of Cyprus' efforts to deal with the illegal commerce in cultural heritage are not restricted to claiming its ownership of icons and other items that are discovered from time to time in galleries and auction houses abroad. The information and enlightenment campaign is ongoing and long-term at all levels. During every official meeting that His Beatitude Archbishop Chrysostomos II of Cyprus has with foreign officials, diplomats, religious leaders and visitors, and on his own official visits abroad, he unfailingly raises the issue of the protection of our cultural heritage. He has also written letters on the same subject from time to time to the President of the European Commission, to heads of state and governments, and to international organizations. Since 2009, following an initiative and through the mediation of the Swedish Embassy, His Beatitude participates for the first time since the establishment of the Republic of Cyprus in a dialogue with the Mufti of Cyprus. Within this dialogue, a peaceful resolution of various problems was pursued, including the free access and worship at the religious sites. Through these efforts, after 18 months, the Bishop of Carpasia, Christoforos, was eventually allowed by the occupation regime to travel to Carpasia and serve the Divine Liturgy for the first time after 4 years. It was also made possible the cleaning and basic maintenance of 15 monuments by FGAF. For this purpose, common visits of the representatives of both the Church of Cyprus and FGAF to a number of monuments took place. With the intervention of His Beatitude, the Mufti of Cyprus was exceptionally permitted to visit and pray in Muslim monuments in the free areas of Cyprus. The celebration of the Divine Liturgy was allowed to a number of churches. For example, at the renovated Church of Panagia Tragoniki Threas village on the 2nd of February this year, served by Bishop Porphyrios of Neapolis. Since 2013, along with the invitation of the Archbishop and the Mufti of Cyprus, the leaders of the religious groups of Cyprus, the Maronites, Armenians, and Latins, also participate in this dialogue. In September 2013, the Special Rapporteur of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations on issues of freedom of religion or belief, Dr. Heiner Bielefeld, visited Cyprus, and among others, he met up with all the religious leaders of the island. In his report, Dr. Bielefeld strongly supports the right in both of access and worship to all religious monuments and their restoration and maintenance. For the past 7 years, the Church of Cyprus has operated its representation to the European Union in Brussels. One of the primary objectives of the representation is, of course, to publicize and present the 39-year-old illegal occupation by Turkish troops of the Christian places of worship in the occupied northern part of the Republic of Cyprus, and the way that they have been stripped of the cultural treasures that once adorned them. Moreover, a series of exceptional publications by the Church of Cyprus aimed at enlightening readers on the continuing destruction of our cultural heritage has been written by distinguished Byzantologists. Another long-term project carried out by the Church of Cyprus with the same purpose has been the systematic recording of the Byzantine works of art, murals, icons, sacred vessels, manuscripts, incunabula, etc., and the creation of a digital archive, so that in case of theft, the possibility exists to submit an evidence-based report to recover the stolen object. This laborious task, on behalf of the Holy Synod of the Church of Cyprus, was undertaken and successfully completed by Dr. Athanasios Papageorgiou, who visited all the dioceses, parishes, and villages in the government-held part of Cyprus for the purpose of the project. An extension of this project is the ongoing endeavor to create a digital archive of relics and treasure originating in the occupied areas. This archive contains not only the surviving relics and treasures from the occupied areas, but photographic evidence from old publications or from refugees who brought it with them during the Turkish invasion. During a recent meeting of the Holy Synod of the Church of Cyprus, priests and church wardens were asked to install theft alarms in the main churches of their parishes and villages, and to take a range of other measures aimed at safeguarding treasures and other ecclesiastical objects. They were requested to remove such objects from isolated chapels and place them in the main churches for safekeeping. The creation of icon museums by the Holy Archbishopric and the local bishoprics over the past 3 decades is a project that has made a timely contribution to the preservation of the trade in works of our religious heritage. The bringing together, securing, preserving, and proper promotion of religious heritage protects it from theft and at the same time cultivates in people a sense of respect and responsibility for its preservation and safekeeping. The Church of Cyprus is fighting and intensifying its efforts to prevent and put an end to the illegal trade in religious heritage. A lot has been and is still being done, but there remains much more to achieve. We would like to propose the following. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs should attempt to sign a memorandum of understanding with countries where there is clear evidence of trafficking of cultural goods in particular in Northern Europe. Let me take this opportunity to welcome the recent renewal of the Memorandum of Understanding with the United States of America, in which a provision has been included to cover post-Byzantine icons of the 19th century, as proposed by the Church of Cyprus. We should proceed as soon as possible with the establishment of an observatory on trafficking, buying and selling of Cypriot antiquities and other ecclesiastical objects, with the aim of the timely identification of their whereabouts and being able to make an effective claim for their return when they are discovered. We expect the Department of Antiquities to undertake the necessary initiative and coordination of all interested parties. To achieve the objectives of the observatory, cooperation is required among the Church, the Department of Customs and Excise, the Cyprus Police, and the Attorney General Office. The experience of other countries, such as Greece and Italy, will help us enormously. The Ministry of Education and Culture, through lectures, competitions, and printed material, should inform high school students about our cultural heritage, its importance, and ways of protecting it. Legislation governing these issues should be updated, and auctions of works of art should be regulated by legislation. We should proceed with the adoption of advanced technology programs. The documentation of our cultural treasures will promote our culture effectively, will facilitate the academic research in the field, and additionally will contribute a lot to a higher level of protection. The image identification program offered by Google could contribute decisively towards the protection of both buyers and professional dealers, galleries and auction houses, and diminish drastically the incentives of receivers of stolen cultural goods. We are convinced that through a coordinated team effort by the Church, the responsible state services, and close collaboration with the relevant authorities in other European countries and the United States of America, we can achieve much more in our efforts to prevent and put an end to the illegal trade in the religious heritage of Cyprus, which belongs to European and indeed global culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Hadjiionas. I call His Excellency the Minister of Education and Culture, Dr. Kostas Kadis, to present a different and unique Kyrenian. A Kyrenian who is 1,024 meters tall and almost 250 million years old. Our mountain, Glafkos. Your Excellency, please.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before I start, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be here today and escape, even for a while, for the duties of the minister and be an academic for a few moments. The pictures that I will show you today derived from a research project that was carried out a few years ago by the Nature Conservation Unit of Frederick University. And this project focused on the conservation of the most rare and threatened plant species of Glafkos range. My presentation is structured in 4 main sections. In the first section, I will give you an overview of the main characteristics of the Glafkos range, and mostly the characteristics that resulted in the natural richness of the range. In the second section, I will present some information regarding the flora and the habitats of finally the conservation policies, and especially the work that has been carried out so far regarding the inclusion of Pentadactylos in the Natura 2000 ecological network. The Pentadactylos mountain range runs parallel to the northern coastline, separating the mainland from the sea. Its length is approximately 8 kilometers and has an average width of 5 kilometers. It consists of a series of limestone peaks with altitudes between 700 to 1,024 meters. Geologically, it is considered as the southern part of the Alps, which lies from the Pyrenees mountains at the west to the Himalaya at the east. In the southern side, the Pentadactylos range descends in the Messauria plain, while in the northern side is adjacent to the sea. Now, certain factors resulted in the creation of a rich biodiversity in the area. And the most important of these factors are the varied geology and geomorphology of the area, with steep and smoother slopes, with gorges, with a mosaic of different geological substrates that can host a variety of different organisms. The diverse climatic conditions, you can see here the northern part of Pentadactylos range, where the precipitation is higher and the vegetation is more dense. The opposite in the northern part, in the southern part of the range, where the temperature is higher and this area is drier and the vegetation is sparse. As it was mentioned before, the Pentadactylos has a long history. Actually, it was created approximately 5 million years ago. And another factor that led to the rich biodiversity is the location of the Cyprus in the crossroad of 3 continents, which makes the island a migration route. Now, all these factors resulted in a big and rich biodiversity, which can be expressed in the level of different habitats, and the Pentadactylos range hosts approximately 20 habitat types, 20 different habitat types. And if we consider that the whole Europe hosts approximately 220 habitat types, you can imagine how rich is this area. Approximately 10% of the Europe's habitat types are represented in this small plot of land. You can see some of the habitat types of Pentadactylos range, small shrubs, pine forests, steep rocks with this characteristic chasmophytic vegetation. In most cases, there is a mosaic of different habitat types that exist together, like in this situation. And in certain cases, you can see that what human created is harmonically integrated in the natural landscape. This is the castle of St. Hilarion, again with characteristic chasmophytic vegetation. And another picture from the same castle. Now, all these habitat types host a variety of plant species. Pentadactylos actually is the second most important area of Cyprus in terms of floral richness. after Troodos Mountains. It hosts 60 of the 145 endemic plants of Cyprus. These are the plants that exist exclusively on the island, nowhere else in the world. And 13 of these species are local endemics. That means that they can be found only on Pentadactylos mountain range and nowhere else in Cyprus, nowhere else in the world. And I'll show you some of these unique plant species. This is the Brassica Hillarionis. It was named after the castle of St. Hilarion. It is a wild relative of the cabbage and and actually the scientists studied this plant in order to transfer some of its characteristics to its cultivated relatives. This is another local endemic plant of Pentadactylos range. Actually, it's a wild carnation, Dianthus cyprius, and exists exclusively on Pentadactylos range. Another local endemic is the Salvia merensis. It was named after Venus, and it's a wild sage, very aromatic plant. It's an aromatic plant, and it's an impressive plant which is above Kythrea village. Another local endemic, you see that most of the local endemics are named after the area where they were first located. Sedum lambuse, again, local endemic. Monosma gaspidosa, another impressive local endemic species of Pentadactylos. Arabis cypria, local endemic. And a very rare species, the Sideritis cypria. It's an aromatic plant. It's the mountain tea of Cyprus. And its population consists only of 300 individuals. This is actually the most rare and threatened species of Cyprus, Delphinium casei. Can be found only on 3 locations on the Pentadactylos range, and its population consists of approximately 40 individuals. Very threatened species. And this is Solenopsis antiphonitis. This species was very recently discovered, and it was located very close to this church, Antiphonitis Church, and that's why it is called Solenopsis antiphonitis. And this is an emblematic species, Cyclamen cyprium. It's an endemic species of Cyprus. Actually, it's the national plant of Cyprus. It is also found in the central range, the Troodos Mountains. Now let's proceed with the threats that affect Pentadactylos biodiversity. Despite the richness and the importance of the biodiversity of this area, its biodiversity is threatened by severe threats. The most severe threat is the uncontrollable pouring. There is a lot of activity in several parts of Pentadactylos range that modify the landscape and directly affect the rich biodiversity of the area. You can see this area, for example, should be part of a protected area according to the European legislation. The same with this part. European directives protect the species and the habitats that exist in these areas. Some more pictures. And a large part of the material that is secured from these quarries is used for the creation of buildings and infrastructure, again on the Pentadactylos mountains. This is another problem. The expansion of inhabited areas towards Pentadactylos. And we have several examples. in areas that, again, normally they should be protected. For example, this area is close to Karli village, very close to Kyrenia. In these rocks, 7 out of the 13 local endemics of Pentadactylos can be found, and they are very, very threatened by the expansion of the inhabited area. All these species, I forgot to mention before, are protected by the European legislation, are part of the Annex 2, are included in the Annex 2 of the Habitats Directive, and normally the member states should take any possible conservation measure for the preservation of these threatened species. Overgrazing poses another threat. Overgrazing is very common on Pentadactylos and affects habitats and species. For example, the most threatened species of Cyprus, the Shamounkis, strictly is threatened by overgrazing. We tried many times to collect plant material in order to study the reproductive biology of the species. We tried to collect seeds, but all the plants were destroyed before fruit setting, so it was impossible to study the biology of these very rare species. Now, planting of exotic and invasive species within natural areas, again, it's a threat. It changes the landscape. These invasive species, mostly Acadia species, replace the natural vegetation and pose a threat for the local vegetation and the local species. Illegal dumping of waste, this is a habit in the northern side. We found many cases that very, very rare species were directly affected by this situation. Here it affected Salvia veneris that I showed you before, and this affects Brassica Hilarion, close to St. Hilarion Castle. Climate change is not a theory for Pentadactylos, it's a real threat. As you can see here, extensive areas have been affected. Prolonged periods of drought combined with high temperature have already caused the extinction of woodlands. In 2008, a large number of individuals of some of the most threatened species, like this one. This is Sideritis cypria, which lost half of its population in 2008 due to prolonged drought and high temperatures. The same with Onosma trodens, Onosma caspitosa, and Salvia veneris. They dried out after a prolonged period of drought, and according to the Meteorological Service of Cyprus, during the previous century, precipitation decreased by 17% from the first to the last decade of the century, and projections for the climatic conditions on the island for by the end of the century suggest that both maximum and minimum temperatures will increase by up to 4 degrees, and rainfall is projected to decrease by up to 20%. And of course, the political situation prevailing in Cyprus and the division of the island for more than 35 years creates additional problems for the local biodiversity. Military activities within natural areas were found to negatively affect some of the most rare plant species of the Pentadactylos range. This flatland covers certain square kilometers is on a habitat type that should be protected according to European legislation. Moreover, the occupied area that is not under the control of the Republic of Cyprus is not managed according to the EU legislation and international conventions relating to biodiversity conservation. And certainly, nature conservation is not a priority for the regime in the north. Finally, over the last 50 years, the political situation of Cyprus is considered the main political problem of the island, and less attention is paid to issues such as nature conservation. Now, the rich biodiversity of Pentadactylos range will be protected by including Pentadactylos in the Natura 2000 network. This is an ecological network. This is the instrument that the European Union established in order to protect the biodiversity of the European Union. Each country proposes certain sites to be included in this network, and Cyprus has proposed our sites within the framework of the LIFE project. 7 areas of biodiversity importance were identified in the occupied area of Cyprus. And this map shows these areas. But in the end, the government of Cyprus did not incorporate these areas because they are not under its control and they are not regulated according to the European acquis. However, the EU has funded the preparation of management plans for these areas, and these management plans are carried out by a Polish company, if I'm not mistaken. So, this is the site of Pentadactylos. Each color represents a different habitat type. You see a mosaic of different habitat types. And beyond the richness in flora and habitats, the Pentadactylos range hosts a large number of important fauna species. So this is what I have to say. I will close with my presentation with a wish for a free and unified country where all its inhabitants will enjoy this very rich natural heritage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I call our Mayor, Mr. Glafkos, Cariolou, for his presentation.
I am sure some of us will have some 10 or 20 or 50 euro coins, 50 cent coins in our pockets. And also, as you see, we have been producing stamps, we have been producing emblems, and that became the emblem of hope and return for the Kyrenians. Historians and traditions are saying that King Kiphaeus, after the Trojan War, around 1200 BC, approached Kyrenia, and together with Mr. Praxandros, who was the chieftain of Laconia, Praxandros actually established Lapithos, and Kiphaeus established Kyrenia. And then, 300 BC, a poor captain sailing around the port of Kyrenia, Lina is smiling. Something happened to the ship and she sank down to 33 meters. And there she is with 380 amphoras instead of the warriors carried by Kiphaeus. Some wine amphoras and some wine you will have the chance to taste from Macas winery in a while. So, Andreas Cariolou found the wreck, discovered the wreck, and then something amazing happened. From August 1968 to July 74, a great team of scientists and underwater archaeologists performed the impossible. a costly and unique for those times underwater excavation. They brought to the surface over 60% of the wooden hull of the ship you can see here. And you can see Mrs. Lina Sweeney there, just doing all her work, very difficult and very precise work. And there she is, our ship, the Kyrenia ship, in the castle of Kyrenia. Many years after that, Mr. Harit Zalas, from the Hellenic Institute of Nautical Tradition, he had a crazy idea to reproduce an authentic replica. And then he called the scientists, again, Susan Katsev and her husband Michael Katsev, Dick Steffi, Rand, and they approached together with Harit Zalas, Mr. Manolis Psaros, that you're going to see in a while, and they produced Kyrenia II, the first authentic replica of a Hellenic cargo ship of 300 BC, of the time of Alexander the Great. And there she is sailing, and you can read much more information in Res Maritima. So the Kyrenians produce a second replica after the first one rests in Agia Napa Museum, where you can enjoy it and where you can see it. Kyrenia Liberty. Kyrenia Liberty carried a lot of experiments, and there we can see Susan Katsev experimenting with her over 400 amphoras, loading and unloading the ship. And there you can see one of the experiments. Kyrenians always want to go home. And as cousin Mattheos Cariolou says, we can even utilize music diplomacy, violin diplomacy. And this is the only army we have. We have our heritage, we have our culture, and we have to utilize this. So, experimental nautical archaeology and displaced Kyrenians were still far from their destination. So in November 2002, the Kyrenia Chrysogava Cultural Foundation constructed in Limassol with frame first method and launched the second scientific full-size replica, the Kyrenia Liberty. From 2002 to April 2004, especially 2004, is a very significant year for Cyprus. Kyrenians, every Wednesday, a joint crew of young Greek and Turkish Cypriots receive rigorous training on the theory of ancient navigation and seamanship at Lydra Palace under the auspices of EU representative van der Meer. It seems unbelievable, but it did happen. And there you can see even Mr. van der Meer on the steering, on the tillers of the Kyrenia Liberty. I initially thought it was a joke when Mrs. Lina Sweeney and Susan Katsev suggested, and they expressed their strong desire to research the behavior of the crew and the ship on board in real conditions, sailing with us through the rough Aegean Sea for over 550 nautical miles. It was not a joke. They did it. Now, before we go to Greece in 2004 with a joint crew of Greek and Turkish Cypriots, we had to bring our light. We had to bring the light of St. George of Upper Kyrenia. So, we went to Mrs. Angeliki Yashar, and she was alive in those times. She lowered the candle, we light the storm lamp of the ship, and we carried it all the way through the Aegean Sea to Athens. And of course, during our return trip, there she is, Mrs. Lina Sweeney, a real Kyrenian, sailing with us together with Susan Katsev for 550 nautical miles, with weather up to 6 before and sometimes more, and they persevered. So, this is why we honor them today. But let me keep my promise. I will tell you a little bit about Jonathan Blair. Jonathan Blair is another Kyrenian who lives abroad. He's a National Geographic photographer. And his first trip to Cyprus was in 1971. He met Andreas Cariolou and became interested in diving. It was Cariolou who suggested that Jonathan takes formal scuba instruction. No more than 40 years later, Jonathan produced copies of his first underwater photos from the new Andreas Cariolou wreckside. For me, 3 or 4 months ago, it was bizarre, it was bewildering to hear that from a friend after so many years. He used the film that they have been using in those times, he digitalized it, and finally, we discovered from where this amphora is coming from. There, you have a Rhodian wine amphora, brought up probably by Lina from the Kyrenia ship. This is an unknown shipwreck. The only human being alive who knows where this shipwreck is in the United States, is Jonathan Blair. He sent the pictures that I will show you in a while to Ina. And they said, that's Jonathan. I'm sure you remember him, those Kyrenians. Jonathan was with the Kyrenians as they were held hostages, 500 of them in the dome, by the Turks. And you can see Jonathan Blair and Arlinka Blair. And that's a strange picture of Andreas Cariolou holding the amphora you see on your right-hand side. We never knew from where this amphora came from. Now we do. Some unbelievable, beautiful pictures coming from an experienced professional photographer of National Geographic Society. And those red dots are marks of amphora positions, more than 20, 23 amphoras you can see. And the length of this is estimated about 20 meters by 10 meters. What Ina said was, it is probably a Chian amphora from the island of Chios, and probably 500 BC. That's a very big question mark. Allow me now to say that today we honor and pronounce Mrs. Susan Womer-Katsev, Mrs. Helena or Lina Wild-Sweeney, and Mr. Harry Zalas for very particular reasons and very strong reasons of keeping our emblem. And they have been, especially Lina and Susan, they have been the guardian angels of our ship in the castle of Kyrenia since we are forced out of our homes in Kyrenia. So we today we honor them. Let me introduce you to Susan. Mrs. Katsev was trained as a sculptor at Swarthmore College, the Boston Museum School, and Tyler School of Fine Arts. Worked as an artist on Roman and early Byzantine shipwrecks at Yashiada for the father of global underwater archaeology, Dr. George Bass, where she met her future husband, Michael Lazar Katsev. Mrs. Katsev worked on the Kyrenia shipwreck excavation as draftsman, photographer, and even film director and writer for a film documentary on the project of the Kyrenia ship. After the loss of her husband in 2001, Susan devoted absolutely and completely herself on the work for the completion of the final publication of the Kyrenia ship in the INA Nautical Archaeology series with Texas A&M Press, adding practical experiments, you have seen some of them, with the Kyrenia II and Kyrenia Liberty ship replicas. Mrs. Katsev managed to find a way to protect the ship of Kyrenia in extremely difficult times in a very effective and practical way like no other Kyrenian ever did. Her late husband, Michael, and herself are tightly spliced with our town and her people for a record period of over 47 years. The ship of Kyrenia is indeed her only precious and cherished child. Mrs. Helena Wild Sweeney, we call her Lina, and she's our Commodore on board. Mrs. Helena Sweeney is a research associate with the Semitic Museum, Harvard University, where she's a curator of the Cypriot and Chesnola collections. She has been assistant director for the Sotira Kaminouthia excavations in Cyprus. A publication is in progress, and is currently a member and author of the Kyrenia ship publication team. She holds her degree from the Institute of Archaeology, London University. Mrs. Sweeney in 1968 worked with Dr. Varsos Garagiorgis at Gideon, and after that she was employed as the architect of the Kyrenia ship project, drawing, labeling, and cataloging the amphora cargo, the millstones, and the wood of the hull. In 1969, she joined again the excavation of the Kyrenia ship. At the end of 1969, after most of the excavation team had left Cyprus, Mrs. Sweeney stayed behind in Cyprus with a small group of scientists to try and protect the hull as it was completely exposed, and they did successfully manage to do that in an exhaustive operation to cover the ship and protect it underwater, down at 33 meters. Herself and her husband, Stuart Sweeney, became local residents after purchasing a house in Orca, our district, in the summer of 1970. And for those of you that you are interested, in 1974, the Sweeneys were working on an archaeological site near Skouryodissa when the coup and the invasion exploded. Mrs. Sweeney, pregnant with her son, started running as most of us, and finally was evacuated and returned to the USA. She returned on the Kyrenia ship project again in 2003, and since then she works tirelessly with Susan Katsev. But let me tell you what she says. It is something that every Kyrenian must listen to. And not only that, all the diplomats must listen to this. She says, what do we want for the Kyrenia ship? We want the whole world, but more important than that, the people of Cyprus to recognize and appreciate this unique piece of Cypriot culture, heritage, and history. We want this extraordinary ship to remain in the best possible physical condition and to demonstrate to all that she does not represent division of the island post-74, but cultural history that illustrates what the island of Cyprus was going through 2,300 years ago, not long after the death of Alexander the Great, during the time of the Diadochi and the lives of the people who sailed here on board. I call my fellow Kyrenian, Mrs. Helena Wild Sweeney, to receive her honors. Lina, please join me.
Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, friends, it is a great honor for me to be here this evening. Mrs. Katsev was not able to come to Cyprus this year, and so she has sent a message for me to read to you. But after I do this, I would like to say a few of my own words and what the Kyrenianship experience has meant to me. This is from Susan Makarios. Good friends of Kyrenia, your honor to me is really directed to all the team who excavated and preserved the Kyrenia ship, and to the many townspeople of Kyrenia who helped us, and also came to love the ship. My late husband, Michael, who directed the project, I know joins me in our sincere hope that this wonderful gift from the past can serve to unite all Cypriots in a love of your past and the importance of preserving it. As the son of the Rex finder, Mayor Glafkos Cariolou, dear Glafkos as far as I'm concerned, and Susan as well, and to all of us, is striving to see ancient ships as carriers of hope throughout the island. My thanks for this honor go out to him and to all the Kyrenians who support this quest. If I can add, are we going to do Susan's award now?
You will have to carry all this to the United States, I'm afraid.
I've got a large suitcase.
This is for Susan,
Yes.
and this is for you. Ανδρών αγαθών έργο γενομένο, έργο και δηλούστε τα στιμάς. Σε ανθρώπους, η μετάφραση, σε ανθρώπους που στάθηκαν γενναίοι με έργα, όπως τη Λάινα και τη Σούζαν, πρέπει να εκφραστούν και οι τιμές με έργα. When people's deeds have been brave, they should be honored in deed only, according to Thucydides. And this is what Lina and Susan have been doing for more than 40 years. Thank you very much. Of course, in Cyprus, we always give a piece of bread for somebody who is traveling all the way to the United States. So you will have a piece of bread.
Oh, this is wonderful.
Yes, you? Okay.
I would like to say a few words that I accept this honor, not for myself, but for the Kyrenia ship. This ship, as you have heard from Glafkos, and I know only too well, is a unique piece of world history. and more specifically, it is a unique piece of Cypriot cultural heritage. I first came to Cyprus in 1968 to work on the project, as you have heard, and as you've seen me diving, standing very gently on the hull of the ship. This experience was probably the most exciting archaeological project that I have ever been on in my life. And our careers, my husband's and my careers, have jointly taken us to many, many different places. The people of Kyrenia welcomed us, and I am speaking now as a member of the team. And we had the most extraordinary time. But Cyprus means much more to me than just that experience. We came to live here. My husband was the director of the Cyprus American Archaeological Research Institute for 15 years, and I'm glad to see that it is represented here tonight, still with an interest in Cypriot cultural heritage. My family grew up here, and they had the most wonderful life growing up. And that life is still perpetuated by the presence of our daughter, Alessandra Sweeney, who is a professor at the University of Nicosia and has taken up life here with Haris Mesdanas and now with our grandson, Leonardo. So the connection continues. 1968 was quite near the beginning of my archaeological career, my underwater archaeological career. And here I am, still here. I am very much involved in the publication project because without it, the story of the Kyrenia ship can never be properly told. It is the responsibility of every archaeologist who digs up something of the past to make sure that it is published properly and the story is told. And that is what we are in the process of doing. The Kyrenia ship has taught me commitment, not just the commitment to produce this publication, but we were the ones who excavated her on the bottom of the sea, thanks very much to Glafkos' father, Andreas Cariolou. We were the ones who uncovered her. We brought the cargo to the surface. We brought the wood to the surface in pieces, and then we preserved it. And then we put it back together again, as you have heard the story. And we were the ones who placed her in the gallery in the castle in Kyrenia. But this commitment continues much more and much longer, for we are very protective of that ship and care about her deeply, as Susan Katsev has demonstrated more than anyone else. And we now realize that she's quite an old lady living on land. She was safe on the seabed in a certain way, but we took her out of her natural environment, which you have heard so well tonight, hearing about the natural environment on land. But we took her out of the natural environment of the seabed and put her in a more critical one. The Kyrenia ship has taught me patience. Patience to deal with situations that she was in no way responsible for. A division of the island in 1974 definitely had an impact upon her, and continues to have an impact upon her. But she has also taught me to stand up for the things that I feel are important and precious, much more in anything that has to do with me or any other member of the team. And I want you all to realize how important she is and how much she can teach us. You have no idea. She tells us about the economy. She tells us about enterprise. And the hull of that ship is full of magic and surprises that I continue to find today. There are 2 grants that are ready and waiting to work on taking care of the Kyrenia ship. And I ask you all of you, diplomats, individuals alike, to work hard to see that the realization of those 2 grants happens, and that the Kyrenia ship will be preserved not only for the Kyrenians, but for all the Cypriots, for the next generation that was so magically demonstrated with the musical performance tonight, and for my Cypriot grandson. So please, all of you, work with us to make sure that the Kyrenia ship is here for a very, very long time in the future. And thank you for giving me this incredible opportunity in my life.
But who is Haris Zallas? Haris Zallas is the person who thought of producing an exact replica. He's a compatriot of Kavafis, born in Alexandria on the 20th of July 1936. In 1956, at the height of the exodus of the Europeans from Alexandria and Egypt, he emigrated to Brazil. He wandered for 2 years in major Brazilian ports, working in shipping industry, but did not settle there. He came permanently in Athens, Greece, and worked successfully with nautical tourism, whilst at the same time he unfolded his lifetime passion for archaeological research. Haris Zallas is the president of the Hellenic Institute for the Preservation of Nautical Tradition, and he is considered the father of experimental archaeology. He was unable to be with us because he's excavating now in Alexandria. I would like to call Mr. Manolis Psaros, who was the boat builder, who actually built the Kyrenia 2 that you can enjoy in the Thalassa Museum. Manolis, please join us. Manolis will carry the honors to Hari when he comes out of his dive in Alexandria. I would like to thank everybody for your patience, and now please, we would like to follow Mr. Iliadis. We are jumping a little bit on the program for his guided tour on the treasures, and then we follow to a reception, and nobody, absolutely nobody, is allowed to leave without a bottle of wine. Mr. Andreas Psaras is with us, the Makarios winery, and you can see the sheep on board the bottle, and he has been producing a special label for this event. So please let us follow Dr. Yannis Iliadis. Oh, excuse me, we have to give some presents.
I would like to call our main speakers, His Excellency, the Ambassador of Greece, Mr. Vasilis Papaioannou, His Excellency, the Minister of Education and Culture, Dr. Kostas Kalis, Reverend Andreas, the General Director of the Foundation, Archbishop Makarios III, Mr. Andreas Fylaktou, I'm sorry. The director of the Byzantine Museum, Mr. Yannis. And now we will follow Dr. Iliadis for the visit.
This were before the restoration 1950s. In his apartments were found the many frescoes and mosaics were found on 1997. The pieces that we are going to see upstairs, they knew about it and they allowed to be stolen these artifacts. And unfortunately, they have gained money out of the destruction of our heritage. And here is the chapel of the fresco that was made by the Menil Foundation in Houston. And we have them downstairs. Please follow me.
Fylaktou.